Alright, hello everybody, and welcome to a second tips video from myself on driving the Maserati 250F for our upcoming 2022.1 season at SimRaceSA. Now, today I just want to go through three, I'm going to call them techniques, that I've picked up that helps me drive this car. One tip, let's call it a beginner tip. Another one, the second one, we're going to call getting out of trouble when you're in trouble, and then the third one I'm going to call an advanced tip. So let's dive straight into the first tip, and the first tip has to do with entering the corner. I like to call it almost entering the corner before you enter the corner. So let me just sort of explain what I'm talking about here, and actually let's make this a little bit slower. Okay, so typically a normal car, when you turn in, reacts and the car turns towards the inside apex. Not really so much as you'll have noticed with the Maserati 250F. As you can see here, I've got quite a lot of steering lock on, and the car's not really heading towards the apex. Look at that. Not really heading towards the apex at all. And we are, in fact, typically, what we're doing is we're just experiencing a whole lot of understeer. Now, I'm not going to talk about how to do anything about that just yet, but if you turn in a bit early, like I do here, you can see I'm very gently on the brakes. If you turn in early, so I'm not on the brakes at all, okay, maybe a tiny little bit, but you turn in early and then you get on the power. You see how early I am on the power here. Now, in a normal race car, you'd never do this, right? You would never be on the power going into the apex. But with the Maserati, what's going to happen here is the back of the car is going to come out on the power. You can see now I'm starting to have to wind on a little bit of opposite lock, and by getting on the power, what it's done is it's pushed us into the apex of the corner. Now you can see I'm being a bit aggressive with this here, because obviously we probably want to be at this point around down there on the track. So I'm still perfecting it. But what it does allow is, because the engine of the Maserati is so far forward and it's a V12, so it's super heavy in comparison to the rest of the car, you've got very little weight on the back of the wheels, right? So you've got a very little weight here. So lots of weight here, very little weight here. So when you get on the power, what happens, of course, is that the back starts to come out. And when the back starts to come out, it naturally turns you into the corner. And what you can then do is counter steer gently. You know, you don't need to be too rough with the car. Counter steer gently, and that helps you power your way out the corner and helps you give turn in to the corner. So let's have a look at that in sort of real time. So we turn in early. There you go, turn in early. On the power, car steps out a bit, control it, and there you go, and off you go. So by using, by not trying to fix the understeer of the car, not trying to overcome the understeer, just riding it out, and then getting on the power to turn yourself into the corner even more and power yourself out, that will help you counter the understeering nature of the car and help you tackle some of those tighter bends a little bit easier by turning in a little bit earlier and then powering on to turn yourself in even more and to stop the understeer, and off you go. Okay, so that's basic tip number one. Well, that's basic tip one. Tip two, I said, was get me out of trouble. Now I think that's around about here. What was it, the lap before? Hang on, let's have a look. This car, obviously, you can get things wrong, right? It's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen. And at Silverstone in particular, you can head off into the weeds there very, very easily. Like I think I do on this lap. Yes, it's this lap. Okay, so I get this corner wrong, right? Now, in a normal car, in a normal race car, that's huge problems, especially for a single-seater car. You're just going to be skidding around. These cars from the 1950s are nothing like that. Their suspension is incredibly floppy, and you've got a lot of suspension travel, big wheels in comparison to the car as well. So it's actually a lot more forgiving. So what I'm trying to say here is don't be afraid of when you go off. When you go off, like I have done just here, So I'm now off. In a normal car, this would be a huge problem. Chances are we'd spin around, we'd be in the barriers, we'd be all over the place. Because the suspension of the Maserati is so compliant, if you just straighten the wheel, and here, critically here, look at the throttle, just come off the throttle to about halfway, maybe 60%, the car is actually very, very forgiving on the grass. And the other thing to note, of course, is when you're on the tarmac, when you're on the black stuff, your brakes, we've all experienced it, the brakes are not very good. You don't have a huge amount of turning. You're kind of skating on the black stuff anyway. So on the grass, it's not actually all that much worse. So you can see here, I'm barely having to counter steer too much to keep myself just heading back onto the black stuff. Now, I know that a lot of the tracks we're going to be hitting up in the coming season are going to be very narrow, so you know this kind of only applies to a track like Silverstone where we do have lots of runoff area. But if you do find yourself, and you know you've got runoff area, if you do find yourself going off, don't fight it too much, because you can get back onto the track fairly easily and fairly painlessly, and not have to worry too much that you're going to have a big accident. So let's just watch me have this problem again. Understeer. Oh dear, I've gone off. Just straighten the wheel, a little bit of steering correction to head back onto the tarmac, and off we go. Right, so that's the first two techniques. One for getting yourself a bit out of trouble, and one what I've called the basic technique. A more advanced technique. Let me see if I can find the right point for it. The more advanced technique is using the brakes to help turn the car in. Now, trail braking is no big surprise, but it can be used to great effect with this car if you know exactly what you're doing. That's not where it is. Where is it? I think we can use this as a decent example. Now, I don't do this perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but by getting on the brakes, the car does tend to step out on you. Let's use maggots, not maggots, Beckett's. So you saw I'm very wayward there, and as I say, I haven't done it perfectly by any stretch of the imagination. But what I'm doing is I'm getting on the brakes to get the car turned in now. So I'm using my technique for accelerating out, but the gearing of these cars typically, when you go into 4th and 5th, the gears are quite long. 1, 2, and 3, the gears are quite short. So going down from 4th, if you're not careful, you lock up the back wheels. But you can use that to your advantage, right? So let's actually watch that from the exterior view. And let's slow it down as well. Okay, so on the brakes hard, down into 3rd, revs the engine a huge amount, and it does unbalance the car. So as soon as you put in a little bit of steering lock, the whole car starts to pitch in and go sideways. So you can then start to point the car towards the apex. What you do have to measure, of course, is what you'll have seen there, the eagle-eyed viewers here will have seen, is that when you do this and you get the car out sideways, at some point the understeer will overtake itself again. So, right, car's out sideways. We're now managing the slide on the throttle, but there, I now have to go and start to turn in once again. And that's because the car will then, the weight transfer will be as such that the weight then doesn't head towards the back, heads towards the front, and you're then going to start understeering again. And that's when you've got to use your throttle technique to start pushing the back out again and getting the car going in the right direction. So let's just have a look at that quickly. In full pace. Okay, so going through maggots, coming up to Beckett's, on the brakes, and crucially gearing down a little bit early to lock the back, turns the car in, and then get on the gas to help push yourself out the corner in the correct direction. As I say, that's not the best example by any stretch of the imagination, but you get the concept, right? The concept is that by locking the rear slightly, and this is the key, is you want to lock the rear slightly. In fact, I would say here I've locked the rear way too much, because look how violently the car pitches in. You ideally don't want to be pitching the car in that violently, because you then have a very violent weight transfer back, and then I suffer from a lot of understeer here, and then I need to crank on the steering the other way. So by just gearing down a little bit early, as I say, it does take a while to get used to, and it is more of an advanced technique. You can get the car to turn in and to kind of help yourself not experience that understeer that we talked about in the beginning, right? So this, I think we'll see over here, where we experience a lot of understeer by not locking the back and just turning the car in. There's a lot of understeer. Look at all that understeer. So that's what the more advanced technique is like. So I hope that helps. Just give you a couple of pointers, and maybe you can learn a little bit from it. Maybe not. Maybe you think I'm talking complete rubbish, but it seems to be working a little bit for me. So try those out and see what you think. Till next time.